Good morning, everyone. We're about ready to start our panel discussion here. So I'm JanMarie Ward, the president-elect of Washington State Public Health Association, and I have this great honor and privilege of working with this panel of community advocates that we have asked us to join us in conversation about how racism shows up in their communities and in their work. And I would say within the communities, working through the systems and structures that are part of public health. So WSPHA back in February passed a resolution that racism is a public health crisis, and you've heard many of our leaders make reference to this resolution. Adrian Dominguez, our president, spoke about it in the opening session yesterday, and Kay Bender, the president of the American Public Health Association, also spoke about racism as a public health crisis and the fact that they also passed a resolution. So WSPHA has acknowledged the effect of white supremacy and institutional racism on the health status, resulting in inequities of higher rates of morbidity and mortality among Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We define white supremacy as the belief that white people are a superior race to the point of being detrimental to other racial or ethnic groups. Well, white supremacy is not as overt as it has been decades ago and throughout our history. Many of the systems that it installed still is in place and affects and is causing harm to our populations. So our question for our panels today is, how does racism show up in your communities, and what are the impacts of white supremacy? And so here we have with us today is Elaine Ishiara, who is the executive director, and my good friend, by the way, the executive director of the Asian Pacific Islander Coalition, advocating together for health. And Ismael Lopez, who is a community advocate with the Northwest Justice Center. Project, sorry. I want it to be a center. Anyway, and Kitara Johnson, who is a trainer, expert trainer in equity, diversity, and inclusion. And we actually met through the work of establishing the Office of Equity Task Force here in this state, and just an incredible advocate herself. And then Jenny Slagel, who is a Yakima tribal member, and she is joining us by Zoom today. And Jenny is a tribal relations facilitator and has a great depth and wealth of information, and has done a lot of community work. She's on the Spokane school board, and anyway, so we're gonna pose that question first to Elaine, and okay.
All right, so this is on. Well, so thank you very much, JanMarie. And I just want to start by saying, when she called and she asked me, well, will you be on this panel for the Washington State Public Health Association conference? And I'm like, okay. And then I didn't even ask the topic. That's the kind of trusting relationship. And then when she told me, I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay. And I have been fretting ever since. But that being said, and then I tried to prepare, so I did send a slide deck, but I think I'm going, for time's sake, I'm going to just be using the first two slides. Oh, this slide. And I want to put a disclaimer. So this is my story, and I'm not here to represent the Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander community, but I'm old enough to have history and I thought I would just share like some of my thoughts. And so the first slide is when looking at, you know, how does racism show up in your community, I have to go back to the history. And so I'm gonna ask, first of all, are any of you here from Tacoma? Okay, so then you're probably familiar with what happened in Tacoma in 1865, right? Well, I didn't learn about that. So racism has been historic in the Asian American community. And it started, one of the first laws was the Asian Exclusion Act in 1882. And as a result of that, leadership in Tacoma decided, you know, they were going to, it was called the Tacoma Method, and really basically a group of men leaders forcibly removed 200 Chinese individuals and their families from the area. And it was becoming like an economic threat. I mean, the story's pretty much the same as things that are happening now. But first of all, I guess I should start by saying I'm Elaine Ishiara, and I'm a third generation Japanese American. So my family has been in the Seattle area just over 100 years, which is nothing compared to the indigenous people that were the holders of this land. But in some circles, I'm historic. So that being said, so this is why, you know, I didn't learn until 1995 when it was the 100-year anniversary about the reconciliation, and I was invited to go on a march. And somebody said, well, haven't you ever wondered why Tacoma doesn't have a Chinatown? And I'm like, no, because I live in Seattle, and you know, the International District is my community. And that was an aha moment. And then the next thing, which is a little bit personal, is in February 1942, the Executive Order 9066, which was issued resulted in the forced evacuation of the Japanese American community. And so this affected my family. And I grew up listening to my mother talk about going to Camp Harmony and the first activity they did with their friends was to stuff these burlap sacks with hay, and then they got to sleep in these horses' stalls and having meals in the mess hall with their friends. And you know, she was like 17, so they had a social life, right? And at the same time, my dad would be talking about his Army buddies, that he has friends, and really focused on that on World War II. Well, what happened was, when I turned 13, my mother brought home this black ceramic potbelly stove. And I'm like, okay, so what's this? And she said, you know, we used to have this at camp. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And she goes, well, it got very cold in the winters in Idaho. And I'm like, what? I said, I thought you were talking about summer camp. Camp Harmony referred to the Puyallup Fairgrounds. And that's where the Japanese from the Seattle area first went before then my parents and their families went to Minidoka. And meanwhile, my father had enlisted into the Army. And so that was my aha moment. And unfortunately, this was 1968. And many of you might remember, most of you may not, but it was like the beginning of the civil rights movement. And after asking more questions and being pretty indignant as to why they would even go, and learning and being more involved in the community, I decided that no matter what I did, I was going to do something to ensure that this wouldn't happen to any other community. Well, you know, 15, 16, 17 years old, you're very idealistic. And so, but that I think has driven that, and the fact that in Seattle, we organized cross-community. And so it was Bernie White Bear, Bob Santos, Roberto Maestas, and Larry Gossett, who were the leaders, and they organized, and that's how I learned to organize in the community. So then we fast forward it up to 20, oh, I'm going the wrong way here. I have these slides. I'm not going to go through it, but you can use it as a reference. But racism now, how is that showing up? Well, you know, hate crimes against Asian Americans increased 149% between 2019 and 2020 in 16 of America's largest cities, and this included Seattle. And this included verbal harassment, physical assaults. I mean, we've all read the news and we all know what's going on. And then there was a compilation of hate crime data that was published by the Center for the Studies of Hate and Extremism, and it revealed that anti-Asian hate crimes increased by 339% last year compared to the year before. And this is like New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, and other cities, including like Seattle, that surpassed the record numbers in 2020. Now, this is just the story of the API community. But, you know, this article goes on to say that every community, particularly the Black community, has seen this increasing hate and discrimination. And, you know, we all hear stories. And the thing is, it's really about how does it show up? I mean, it's always been here under the surface, but over the last 4 years, personally, I think it's just been elevated. And so, and that's just a little brief, short story as to how I'm here, and would like to just hear the rest of the panelists.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Elaine. And so next we're going to go to Kitara Johnson.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for sharing. My name is Kitara Sadawi Johnson. It is Swahili for sword proud. My mother had 13 kids: Kanisha, Kitara, Lashana, Jamie, Elizabeth, Crystal, James, Naomi, Stephen, Daniel, Tisha, Timothy, and Joseph. It's a strong, strong woman there. And I know she's with me today, and I'll share a little bit about that later. But I share that because I grew up on the south side of Chicago. 620 freshmen started school with me, only 114 graduated. By sophomore year, I was chased home by gangs, ended up being forced to join a gang. They broke my hand with a bat, and I had to learn to write with my left hand. I ended up being a survivor of a near-fatal stabbing, and I went to school every single day. It was hard, but I did that. And I survived the inner city, and today I sit before you with a master's degree and an opportunity to share with policymakers the truth. So thank you. And thank you and all those who put this together to ensure that community voice is here, because it matters. It does matter. Right now, there's a new narrative that people of color shouldn't be leading this work. I beg to differ. I don't see why we wouldn't. I mean, we live it every day. And not to say that it's not exhausting. It's not for everyone, but that's why we need to expand our horizons instead of having one person of color as a friend and using that one person's words to speak on behalf of all people. We must stop that. I don't speak on behalf of all Black people. I can only share my truth. And that's what I'm going to share today, hopefully in a succinct manner. I do have a diagnosis and a disability, so I have to have notes because I will forget things if I'm not careful. But I want to start with asking a question: who has influence? Who has access? And who determines what is or isn't an area of focus? It's not often people who look like me. But I'm, again, grateful for this opportunity. But as we talk about this work, I want to say that when we look at the social determinants of health, how many people know what they are? We're missing something. Race, not racism. Race is a social determinant of health. That's a fact. But who decides what's a social determinant? Because we know that there's this racial stratification in our country and within systems. Because when we look at the systemic inequities, we can lay old school transparencies. I'm 44, by the way, years old, years young. But if you lay the transparency of disparities, racial and ethnic disparities, from the education system to the healthcare system to the justice system, they will almost look exactly the same. How do I know? I serve on the Washington Supreme Court's Minority and Justice Commission. I've served on the WSPHA, Special Education Advisory Council. I've served in numerous capacities across the state trying to make influence and bring about change. Race is a social determinant of health. Diagnosis is a privilege. Diagnosis is a privilege because in order to, with the traditional medical model to truly work, you have to have a precise diagnosis, right? But we have a group of people like myself who historically have not had any reason to trust the healthcare system whatsoever. And then people say, well, we're going to educate the community. Black communities don't need your education. We know what we need in our communities. I'm just saying, we know. We may not say it in the language that you're used to hearing it in, but we have to retrain our ear on what is needed in communities and not just bring the one person that we like being at the table, because we have some people that can be more, agitate the system a little bit more because it's not spoken in the way that you like to receive information. Because we talk and we create policy, but we need practices to follow it. I'm going to go next to misdiagnosis of symptoms. Oftentimes, understanding that cultural context of what a diagnosis is. I know for me, my mother, when we would have these dreams, and some of my family members would be in active psychosis, but she would say, that is God speaking to you. And when someone went to give my mother medication, who's currently right now in a very, very bad manic state right now, she refused to take her medicine because of her faith practices. She feels that the medication stops her dreams. And her dreams, honestly, often would predict things that would happen in the future. I've seen it for my family. It would be symbolic, but it was interesting how that happened. So when we look to help people, we have to make sure that they're in the capacity to receive help and understand what those voices may sound and look like in other cultures. We often, our medical model tries to save instead of seeking to understand first. The next thing is evidence-based practices often forget about underrepresented groups. When you look at the data from research-based back practices, or they say, we're going to use this over here, without going in a community, seeing if this best practice worked in Kentucky, why would it work in Tacoma? That doesn't even make sense. We want to fund this because it worked over there. Yeah, and on who and in what neighborhood, and did they have influence, and did they have access? Because oftentimes, culturally understand and respect, I don't ask questions to the doctor. The doctor tells me what's wrong. I respect his or her or their practices and their education, so I don't ask questions. I let them tell me what's going on out of respect culturally. Does that make sense? I hope it's making sense. But oftentimes in our medical model, if you don't ask the right question, you don't get the right information. But if you speak a different language, research shows that if you speak a different language, you are interrupted by the provider within 3 to 5 times in the first so many seconds. Interesting. The other component is insurance coverage reinforces the Western model. You could call it whatever you want to call it, systemic racism, white supremacist culture. That model does not support community care, and that is what many black communities and communities of color, we heal from each other. having that access, listening to our stories, that also is a part of our healing, because we have an individualistic cultural system and we have a collectivist culture people. It's all right, sister, you can clap, that's all right. Yes, because it's true. And people have to hear that there's feedback, that people can resonate with that. And so I hope I'm not going over time. Am I doing good with time? Okay, good, because I have a couple more things to share. Policies that are created. For example, prior authorization. How many people know what that is? You know? Okay, I'm gonna tell you how I know. A few years ago, I was getting on my feet after taking some time off as a 90% disabled American veteran from the United States Army. I had dealt with, thank you. I tested to be a nuclear, chemical, and biological specialist, but my school didn't have all the books to support that either, but that's a different story. But when we talk about policies and prior authorization, that prior authorization works really good for insurance billers and payers and the providers. Does not always work for the people. Imagine needing a tier 3 drug for ADHD. You need a tier 3 drug and you have children, single mom. I can only speak about my experience. So I go into the doctor and I'm working at the time at a particular job. I can't afford to leave my job for long periods of time. I have kids that need theirs because it was like it hit every other child, ADHD, ADD. Every other child. So now I have this time. I try to get my kids at the same time at the doctor's office so I don't miss too much time from work. I go in, and I go to the doctor. I get their appointments. I get over to the pharmacy, and they say, you need prior authorization for this drug. What does that mean? Well, you have to call your doctor's office. Well, I'm in Walmart, and the phone is not quite going through, just had a building is created, so now I have to go back outside with these, all my kids outside trying to make this phone call, and I don't even know what I'm asking for with prior authorization, and they just happen to be at lunch, and it's all the stress that I'm already under with my kids. So now what happens? This prior authorization could take 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, it could take a week, it could take longer. I've seen this in a healthcare setting, and I've seen it individually for myself. So now what happens? I don't have my medicine. Within a week, I'm starting to fall apart. My children are starting to go back to school, but they're getting suspended now, and now I can't leave the kids at home by themselves, or I'm going to get in trouble by DSHS. Somebody's going to make that call. And now I've got these 2 kids at home because they've gotten in trouble because they didn't have their medicine. So I had to make a choice. Do I leave my kids at home and pay the rent? Or do I go to work and leave my kids at home and with the potential risk of losing them? And that's a whole nother system. Because our policies are created to impact most people. But what are we doing to impact all people? What are we doing? Are we creating policies that impact all people and looking at how that is? If you have a tier 3 drug and you lose that tier 3 drug, look at the size of a medicine bottle for ADHD meds or a tier 3 drug, and then you measure the drainage of the street drains. And you see people are living without homes and traveling in their cars and living in these different places. You lose your tier 3 drug, you cannot get that prescription filled for another month. People can be in active psychosis in a whole nother place, all in 30 days. All just because of prior authorization. This is why lived experience is important to be on panels like this, so that people can have an understanding of how it impacts people. I also saw it in a system with a young black male in a healthcare setting who had to go through all the drugs until they got a new one. At one point, I didn't even know this young man. I said, why is he sitting like this? He wasn't even responsive. What's going on? And they said, well, we're waiting on prior authorization. This young man was in a residential program for their behavioral health, and they had to follow these protocols. But I didn't even recognize the young man anymore. Couldn't even responsibly talk to me or look at me because of this medication. He was waiting on his other medication, but needed a prior authorization, but the organization didn't know how to get that faster. I believe that we can do better. And when we talk about food, prevention, slavery, again about history, thank you for bringing up history. History. When black people, Africans, were enslaved and brought to America, they took the resources from the country, the gold, the minerals, all that kind of stuff. They took the gold. They took all the natural resources, and they took the people, but they didn't take our food. They didn't take our food. So a lot of the food that we have here in America are not made for our particular diets. Those are not the things that kept us healthy when we were in Africa. That's just the region where our people were, and it's what we ate. We didn't have that. So when we think about healthcare and prevention, and we're talking about foods, we also need to look at our DNA makeup. What does our ancestry say? Where were our people, and what made them healthy? And what do we need to continue to feed and give to our bodies in order to stay and remain healthy? Prevention is a privilege. That's all. COVID. One last thing. COVID was terrible, but it did teach us that we're only as healthy as the least healthy in our community. That's what COVID taught us.
Thank you, Kitara. Thank you, Elaine. We're going to go to Jenny Slagel, who's joined us through Zoom. Jenny, are you with us?
I am. Hello. Thank you for inviting me to this conversation, and thank you for all the words already shared this morning. My name is Jenny Slagel. I'm a member of the Yakama Nation and Northern Arapaho tribes. I live here on the ancestral lands of the Spokane Tribe of Indians, and who also host a multitude of tribes from across the U.S. here. I am currently doing some consulting work. I previously worked for a couple of health focused nonprofit organizations where I really had a chance to have some input on some of the work that we were doing to address racial equity. One of the organizations that I am currently involved with is the Native American Alliance for Policy and Action. We are a group of professionals here in the Spokane region working to improve relations and therein improve our impact here with the all Spokane governmental agencies and our larger Native communities. We developed a list of priorities that definitely center health and wellness, as well as advocacy and bring in awareness to who the modern day Native American is, specifically living in our Spokane region. So as you know, I was giving some thought as to the question that you're posing: how does white supremacy culture show up in our specific and insert Native community here in our region? I think if you look at the definition of white supremacy, it really talks about internalized attitudes towards some of the characteristics that that there's a whole list of white supremacy culture norms that has been established since the early 2000s. And what it really does is it compares and contrasts communities against a standard white culture norm. And one of the things that I see happening in relation to one of the barriers that our group encounters is that others hear the word white supremacy culture and it shuts conversations down, whereas they see it as being weaponized instead of educational, and it really brings a sense of fear and in losing that individualistic. Kitara, I really appreciate you calling that out. That communities, you know, we don't operate, at least most tribal communities, we don't operate on a individualistic lens. we tend to look out further beyond our own selves. So that really resonated with me. In the fear of losing our individual healthcare is, something that definitely is very individualized, and we need to look out further to community-based types of work and programs. So just sharing a little bit about the snapshot of Native Americans living here in the Spokane region. Spokane is home to over now 24,000 Native people who come from a variety of over 350 tribes across the United States. And if you think about that, there are currently 574 federally recognized tribes and many state recognized tribes, that we have over 350 different tribal members living in our region. We are a real hub for Native American, a real hub of urban Native communities and those living in rural areas. Our graduation rates are about 10% less than our white students. Our Native American life expectancy is a good 6 years behind our white counterparts. And our uninsured rates are almost 2% times the rate less than the general Spokane population. We experience poverty at 2.5 more times than the rate of the Spokane population. And a lot of the historical trauma and the trauma that we experience here in our region really is being dislocated and removed either voluntarily or not to this area. So, if you think about the over 350 tribal people that live in this mainly urban area, being removed and not having that experience of being with our own, and I count myself as one of those living off of my reservation, we don't have that immediate connection back to our homelands. And so also, one thing that we're trying to move away from, it's very important to talk about this snapshot and all of these different racial inequities, but also we are trying to move away from deficit storytelling. We need all of the statistics, but we also need to be sharing about our culture and being as resilient and knowing that tribal health is public health, and that's the way that we need to start reframing some of the solutions. So I will stop there, and we'll come back and I'll share a little bit more. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny, and thank you, Jenny, for also just doing a workaround with us today. Jenny wasn't able to be here and very quickly suggested, can I Zoom in? Is there any way that I can be there? So we really appreciate that extra effort in your joining us. So now we're going to move on to Ismael. And Ismael also, I met, although I believe we had met before, but through our work on the Office of Equity Task Force. And Ismael has an incredibly powerful voice, and in his community and beyond. He also has lots to tell about the farm workers' experience that is so powerful and often gets left out of these conversations, as well as his incredible connections with many of the tribes in the area. So, Ismael.
Thank you. Mishpansinko meteo lazo shinishkaki pademawani iwalmoyokoyatsin no metecutli no metesiwa. Hablando con el permiso dador de la vida y los guardianes espirituales de estas tierras. I just wanted to open by asking permission for the ancestors of these lands to speak from my heart, to share truth. You know, I was telling Jan, I was looking at the list of people and that I was gonna speak last. I was like, well, what am I gonna say? I mean, you all heard. I'm over here writing down notes. It looks like maybe I was texting. I apologize, but I'm writing down notes on my phone of things that were just so powerful. And just when we're talking about this, you know, where do we start? Because we all come in this with our own experiences in our own place. So I was thinking, do we start from the doctrine of discovery? Where we talk about, you know, looking at the native as subhuman? Do we talk about Johnson versus McIntosh, where they start to decide who really has authority over the land, the natives or the state? You know, and actually, there was the Oneida tribe was trying to they purchased back a part of their land. It was their ancestral land, and through however they did it, they were able to purchase it back. And while they purchased it back, they wanted it to be a part of, to be considered tribal land, tribal territory. They wanted their sovereignty back, and that went all the way up to the Supreme Court, and in the end, they decided they were actually denied, and they said the tribe rekindling the embers of sovereignty that long ago grew cold. So saying that it's been too long, it was over, and that was Justice Ginsburg that made that statement. And I just say that, you know, to say that this issue of systemic racism, it goes on both sides of the aisle. It's not a Republican issue. It's not a Democratic issue. It's an issue that affects all of us, and it goes so deep that we think about how does this racism affect our health. When we think about one of the, you know, when they made one of the greatest things, the Proclamation of Emancipation, right? So when that happened, that following day, there was over 300 men, Dakota men, that were executed. And during that time, when the emancipation came through, and these recently freed brothers and sisters, there was no Social Security line, there was no help for them, there was no support for them. So they were just staying wherever they could stay, living however they could live. And there was a huge outbreak of smallpox that killed many, many people, and it's hardly told in the story, in history, right? That's his story, right? So when we look back and we see how has it affected us, there's so many ways, and where do you start, right? Where does it start? Because I can tell you, we can go back to COVID, recent history, and think, you know, as a Mexican, American, Chicano, Indigenous person, right? I look and say, they're chasing my people down. They have our children in cages. Are these the people I'm going to allow to put a untested vaccine in my arm? Am I going to drive down here to Wenatchee to a massive site where there's National Guard and dogs and all these things happening? Am I going to go there? How many people come from countries, militarized countries, to where we see those things and it brings trauma? So what did all people of color say? We all said, we want our shots, we want to receive our medicine in our local clinics. We want it localized, we want it from people that look like us, people that we know, people that we trust, and they were ignored. And how many people died because of that? How many people didn't have access because of that? And so I want to, and it goes to what my sister was saying. Who decides? Who decides who's hired? We want to talk about diversity and equity and inclusion. Who gets to decide who is hired? Who gets to decide who is fired? Who gets to decide who is priority? Who gets to decide in what languages these things will be provided in? And we know that if people don't have the information in a language that they understand, that they're not having this access. So it boils down to who is deciding how important is it to them? How much of a priority is it to them? And when we look back at our history, we don't have there's not the best record. You know, it doesn't raise confidence in the community. And you can go to the Department of Health right now and look at their numbers of what has transpired and what continues to transpire, who are the most impacted per capita, who are the most unvaccinated per capita, and there's all these different reasons. But I just wanted to share a story. So I work. These statements that I make reflect my own opinion and not the opinion of the place that I work. So you know it's about to get real. So we're working, and we're trying to get farm workers vaccinated. We're trying to get them into spaces to be able to receive their vaccines. But the farmers were more interested in their crops. They cannot leave because we're in the middle of the seasons. These crops don't wait for anybody. It's not that we don't care. It's just we just are in this situation, and we need to get through it. And, you know, and most of us were at home, right? Most of us were at home because we were quarantining, while these folks that are being chased down by immigration are out in the fields putting food on our table, and we can't decide whether we have time to take them to be vaccinated or not. Did the spaces where they have 6 people in one little room saying, oh, we don't know if we want to abide by these new rules. Department of Health, they exaggerate so much. They only want us to put 3 people in one room. And so you see all these things that are happening, and then fast forward the next year, the farmers decide, you know what? It's better if we get our workers vaccinated. That way they don't get sick. That way we can get rid of these DOH rules, and we can do whatever we want to do. I'm in Quincy, and there's buses and buses and buses, loads of farm workers coming to get vaccinated. And I'm stopping and I'm talking to them, and some of them don't even know why they're there. Some of them don't even know why they're there, and some of them they're like, okay, I guess I have to get a shot. I guess it's part of the deal. And it takes me back to the 50s, to the 40s, when this program started, this H2A program. It was called the Bracero program, and they would spray our people with contaminants to make sure that we were clean to come in. And so all these things I just shared just to think about how we're impacted by this. And I don't know how far to go to reach folks. And I don't know how. I'm not here to like convince nobody. I hope the people that are in here already know what's up. But what I want folks to do is to think about this, right? If I go into a store and I see a lady, a señora, trying to do something with the person, and I see she doesn't speak good English, I walk right over and I try to help her translate and get through the situation. ¿En qué le puedo ayudar? ¿Qué es lo que está pasando? I do that. But sometimes, like, I might see somebody from another country having a situation, and I won't go over there and intervene. And it's not that I feel a certain kind of way about them. It's just like, oh, well, there's nothing I could do here, so I just move on, go about my business. But maybe there is something that I could do, right? Maybe I could just give a little bit more patience to the person and reassure them that 2 people working to understand one person, we're going to get through this faster, right? So this is the type of bias that exists in the medical system that people don't mean, they don't see. I'm not saying that, you know, the doctors, we can't put all the blame on them or the nurses, because, you know, these are biases. They're so deep in our psyche, we don't know where they come from or how they exist. But anti-racism and love and putting yourself out there and doing the extra for everybody, that's what's going to get us past this. And so I just want to just encourage everybody to take a step forward and to do your part. So I just want to say about that much. I'm so grateful and thankful to Jen and to all the people who put this conference together, and to all y'all for coming here and having this conversation, because as my auntie here said, you know, she been fighting this fight this whole time. And finally, the conversation is coming to where it needs to be, and I'm hoping that we can come together and take the next steps. So, Xiutecpatl, gracias, thank you, Ometeo.
Yes, okay, so this isn't over, by the way. So anyway, we are expecting questions and comments from the audience here with us in person, and also for to hear from those that are streaming in and are online. So we're hoping for that. But in the meantime, I know that some of our speakers have, you know, additional comments that they'd like to share just based upon what others have said.
So I would like to say something. And you know, the anti thing, okay. So I knew that I had transitioned to kind of the other side of the organizing community when COVID arrived, and they started doing food distribution in the International District, and they started having rallies and support for the Black Lives Matter. And I was thinking, okay, you know, I can go with my kids. They're like, Mom, you can't go. You're like at high risk of COVID. You have to stay home. And then people were calling me auntie. We weren't even related. Depending on the ethnic group, I go to this food truck that makes the best. Anyways, and she calls me Mama, or the Black community, they call me Miss. And I'm thinking, oh, okay, I need to embrace this. So when I put together this slide deck, there are a couple slides here that I'd like for you all to take a look at. And it really has to do, I have a clicker. I have control. So anyways, we organize as a community because it's really important, like everybody has said, to center people's and not give them permission, but let them know and support them that they have a voice. And it's not for us, any of us. I look in this room and it's so diverse. So we all have this responsibility. I don't have the answers. I am 66 years old. I do not, you know, revealing age, but I do know this. We all have our truth. We all know what the right thing to do is. We all don't have the answers, and we don't need to. What we do need to do is ask people and not feel like we need to have the answers. So that being said, you know, the organizing, we do it across community because this is a lesson learned from the civil rights movement. If we organize collectively, our communities, allies, we can make a difference. But we also have to remember the unintended consequences and learn from what happened in the civil rights movement because everything has been dismantled. And meanwhile, you know, the racism has been there, and it's just emerging, and it's just warming up, people, okay? So I wanted to leave you with this, and this isn't really our session, but I want you all to take a look at this because Appeal, Rod Liu with the Asian Pacific Partners for Empowerment, Advocacy, and Leadership, we just did a webinar. Well, he invited me to sit. I don't even know because he has, you know, in public health, I want you all to take a look at this later because it's really about transformative and that how we include every one of us in order to make a decision. At the end of the day, no matter how educated, life experience, we all need to sit together, in places like this and have these kind of tough conversations. I want to really say that, you know, with Xiutecpatl and Adrian and Jan, I mean, it has been a game changer for public health. And we should all be proud of what's happening here, because we're living it, lived experience. And then these are really what we need, you know, from at least, I mean, another disclaimer, but this is how we center our work. You know, building trusting relationships. And for the ABI community, I have to put it in here. I have been saying this for at least 20 years with the one hand, you know, when are you going to disaggregate the data? And I don't know if Wendy Gilrush, she emailed me. She is in charge of the BIPOC, and she just said they hired somebody to coordinate. I don't know if any of you work with Wendy, but the BIPOC has not been kind to the Asian American community. And that being said, that's all I wanted to say, but I'm looking around in this room, and it is so diverse. It is much more diverse than the first time I came to this conference. And I feel like I can speak my truth because of who is sitting in the room. So I want you to thank everybody, and I really want to thank my sister here, because seriously, I said yes because of this trusting relationship, and then I said, so what is it? And she goes, well, it's just a panel, you know. And then I look at the bios, and I'm thinking, I'm intimidated. And so anyways, I think we all have a story, and we all need to just reflect on that. Don't wait till you're this age to do that, because wherever you're at, this is where we start from. And we don't have any catching up to do. It's just like, you know, if it's the right thing to do, then you don't have to ask permission. Forgiveness.
Yeah, and so, yes, I definitely want to make certain that our other panelists have opportunity to share additional words with you, but also that, you know, this panel is really important. It's kicking off the really the day that we're really digging down and focusing on racism and how it shows up in public health. And so that we can really, you know, hear the words that, the words of wisdom and the experiences of the people that are sharing today. So that will help us create a path forward for WSPHA. And, you know, we're already talking about it as we're going through the conference today in terms of what that means for our work throughout the year and then leading to our following conference next year. So, Kitara.
Well, I'll try to make it quick. My soapbox. I shared earlier that my mom right now is in a manic episode, almost psychosis-like, and it is hard to watch one of the strongest black women I have ever met, one of the strongest women in general I've ever met in my life, not be present the way that she's always present. She's got a food bank. She's the one who visits the elderly in the community. She's the one who checks on all of her 13 kids and then I don't know how many grandkids. And I made her a great grandma. I am a grandma now. So thank you. With that being said, to every person in this room, stigma is real. Your work is hard, and it's okay to get help. And your help doesn't have to look like you. I know if I was drowning and I'm like, help, 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 if somebody white came, I wouldn't slap it and say, no, send the black hand. That's not what I would do. I'm going to get out. We need each other to survive. And I also want to say I've always often said, man, it's exhausting being black all day. What part of Africa are you from? Chicago. Why is this a professional voice? Why is this a thing? The code switching all day. The katanji, I like to call it katanji. That's when you smile. When someone asks you a question that's full of, or a statement full of microaggressions, I made that a thing to katanji. But I think one of the biggest misdiagnoses in communities of color is the strong BIPOC syndrome. Yeah, I made that up. But being a strong black woman, or being a strong Native woman, or being a strong, sometimes we have to cry, because in order to get to that healing space, We've got these rocks in our shoes from racial trauma, from just the things that happen to us. And everything we say, you know, when people push us in a different way, it comes from this place of pain. So I'm just going to say, to be strong is to be weak. To be strong is to cry. And to be strong is to ask for help. So somebody in here is faking like you got it all together, but you barely got to the conference today. You barely turned off your phone. Your kids are struggling, because a lot of kids are right now, so you're not alone. Kids don't want to go to school anymore, I get it. My daughter's been bullied every day at school, and just because of color of skin, because we go to school in Meade School District. And it's hard for people. I think the counselor told me, she said, it's hard going to work when you're worried about your kids, and the counselor says, have you thought of going to another school? I had to think out loud. I'm like, wait, I served my country, served in the Army for 5.5 years. I'm a 90% disabled veteran. What did you just ask me? Am I going? No, I'm not going anywhere. She was, oh, no, I just wanted to protect her next year. I said, I need you to protect her today. So all of our white allies in this room, I need you to protect people today. Protect people today. Even if it's so much as saying he or she or they were speaking. Because people like to cut people off. But just helping people reinforce their boundaries can be very, very helpful. So that's all I have. I had to toss that anti-stigma message out. He's like, look, you're COVID, Mike. Put that down.
Jenny?
I appreciate some of the historical events being brought up. That is so great. You know, one of my favorite quotes is by Dr. Stephanie Freiberg. She's a Tulalip tribal member, and she talks about that invisibility is the modern day form of racism. And it makes sense when we think about tribal history, current modern day tribal events. And when Native people are thought about, they think about us in a historical context, as if we're not currently also, you know, trying to ensure and keep our tribal sovereignty intact as a people in general. But also when we talk about like invisibility and truth in narratives, you know, the narrative is something that is generally an idea, norm, expectations in society, and then stereotypes that are harmful often become the narrative of who Native people are, and I was talking about the dominant narrative. And so the work that we're trying to do here in the Spokane area with TANAPA is really changing, doing some narrative change work. And it's very intentional in the way that we're taking the existing narratives and those stereotypes and trying to educate people, systems in different sectors that, you know, you hear it a lot in a lot of our gatherings. We just had our Indigenous Peoples Day gathering on Monday. And one of the key themes, one of the key statements that a lot of us speakers made was that we are still here. And that, you know, that is a very simple statement, and it's very powerful to us to be able to say, you know, that these false narratives are something that we can work through. Invisibility continues to hurt our children, our people, our tribes. It supports othering, and someone talked about the denial of humanity. And so as we are working to rebuild those do the narrative change work, we're relying on our values, our cultural knowledge, and really the wisdom handed down by our aunties and our moms and our elders to really help give a voice to Native people. And I saw just briefly in the chat that someone asked, how would you recommend organizations that are trying to do the work, how would you recommend including whatever insert Native, BIPOC communities in the work? I think it definitely is listening, starting with listening, and really building a relationship in that way definitely goes a long way. So thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Just one comment about that before we move on to Ismael. Listening and continuously hearing the quote, "Don't do anything for us without us." That we need to be part of, the voices and part of the process.
So I guess there was a few things that I just wanted to say before ending this, to really one of the things that I'm involved with is we call it MLP. It's a medical legal partnership. So I work with in my job we provide legal services to medium low income folks. So when they go they go into get a health check, oftentimes there's an economic reason, there's a legal reason, there's something going on exterior that is affecting their health, and that you might be able to give them something for what was their high blood pressure, but if you got them an attorney and dealt with their issue, I'm sure their blood pressure would also go down. So what I'm trying to say, we have a lot of overlapping issues, and it's not just one issue. And so when we could look for partnerships to where we're dealing with the whole individual and their whole situation, and each person does their part, we could advance the health of the community. So that's one thing that I really wanted to let folks know about. Also, we spoke about the diversity in this room, and that's beautiful. But we also, how many doctors do we have of, BIPOC doctors? And how do we make that happen if we know it's a need, right? It's hard enough to find out what's going on with some person, but if you're coming from a different culture, a different language, it just makes it even more harder, and it makes it harder for that person to receive services. So one of the things that I've seen happen is that they've gotten professionals together in the working through university to get people of color to get into law school, and they're teaching them what they need, how to apply, what does it look like, bringing in people already to mentor them. So they decided, yes, I want to do it. They're going to have a mentor. They're going to know what that road looks like. They're going to have all these advantages that people that come from a background where they know or have somebody in their family that's a doctor, when a lot of us, our parents never went to high school, or our parents never graduated, our parents never went to college, so we don't have that experience. So creating pipelines directly and being intentional about getting people that look like us into these institutions and changing the institutions as well. And then I just want to reiterate what I said about anti-racism. If you want to be a good ally, be anti-racist. And if you don't know what that means, now you have some homework. And then the last thing I want to say is to really think about, when you see folks, to embrace their cultural foods and their remedies, right? Oftentimes we have things in our culture that help us and that we will embrace, and other things that we won't, right? So I will go into a sweat lodge, I'll go into a temazcal and be in there and sweat and go through the whole experience, before I go to the doctor. I'll admit it, but I usually feel better when I leave. And so there's so many things in our culture, so many things that we need to be understanding of and not dismiss, because there's so many, as I went in the walking with a lady who is like a second mom to me, and she could name all the things that were all the plants and all the medicines that were up in the hills and the mountains, what they're good for, how to use them to make tea, to make rubs, to make this, and I was just like, wow, you have a whole medicine cabinet right here, and oftentimes that stuff is dismissed, that knowledge is dismissed, and I just hope that people think about how we embrace those things, how we embrace health, right? Being healthy rather than getting treating problems. So hopefully we can encourage folks to really go back and look at those things and embrace our culture and our history, because we can find a lot of solutions to our problems today. So thank you.
Okay, so now we're ready for questions. Anyone from the audience? Oh, where? Someone have it? Okay.
I have a mic here,
You do?
JanMarie.
You got it?
Of course I got it.
Thank you, Jeff.
Other duties is assigned.
I did wear comfortable shoes just in case.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Amanda Duggar. I'm in the Spokane Regional Health District, and I work with the Youth Cannabis Commercial Tobacco Program. So one of my questions is, as a youth, as when I was younger myself, being of the Mexican heritage, my father sent us children to school to learn English because he was afraid of going out in public and speaking his own language. And to this day, we still in our family will tend to not speak our language out in public for that fear of my father. So my question to any of you on the panel is, do you guys talk to youth in your community, and what do you talk to them about racism?
All summer. I took part of a program at the Martin Luther King Center called Transform, and it helps young people understand racism, but also how to resist those negative words and images. It looks at it from the lens of the trauma and and healing. And so we did that program, and it's best practice out of the UW, and really, really good program. It really helped the kids to be able to go into their schools and be able to be strong, because the world can give some really strong messages if you don't have enough in your core. I call it, it's not Pilates strengthening your core, it's strengthening your inner core. And my son unfortunately got involved in drugs, and he ended up overdosing and dying twice, and they were able to bring him back, and he goes with me, and he's a certified peer, and he's in the UFC now. So he's currently starting to, yeah, I'm proud of him. He's starting a campaign called Everyday Champions Keep Strong, to encourage young people to get the help that they need and to stay active in the gym. And so that's been his way to stay clean and sober. And it's been awesome to go as a mom with her son and go out and speak at middle schools and things like that.
I think we've kind of been dealing with this as people, I think, the no sabo situations, right? Because a lot of our parents, when they came, they were, speaking from my own experience, my parents were from Texas, so that's Texas for white people. We're from Texas, and when my parents would speak Spanish in the school, they got hit like with rulers and stuff, like legit, like discipline. And so then when my oldest brother went to school, he didn't really, he was kind of like Spanglish, and he got whooped, and they sent him home. And so when it came to me, I'm the youngest, they were like, nope, you're speaking English. Like, we're gonna teach you English, and that's all you're gonna speak. and it was a trauma that we carry in our community. And oftentimes, we look at people who don't speak Spanish as like, oh, they're not real, they're not, raza, son unos quieren ser blanquitos, or things like that. And and we have to have that understanding and that conversation on how we support our kids and how we provide them with the with the prepare them for a future that's going to benefit them. And so, like, I'm an Aztec dancer, so I show up with my plumas, with my thing, we get the drum out, we start dancing, and I try to talk to the kids, like, and tell them from my experience, like, you know what, if you speak more than one language, it's gonna benefit you through your whole life. And once they have the las ganas, I don't know, how do you say las ganas in English? Desire, that's a good word, okay. When they have the desire to do it, they will pick it up and they can learn it, right? But sometimes it takes us as adults maybe we didn't speak when we were little kids, to put our best foot forward. And if you can get a master's degree, you can learn to speak Spanish. You know what I mean? It's not that hard. Just add an O to everything. Talento. But laughter's good medicine, so I just wanted to say that. And good question. And speak to the kids in Spanish, let them know, not to be embarrassed. Sometimes there's things in your native language. Those of us who speak, native language or different language, we know that you could express yourself sometimes in a way, con un cariño or con un amor, that, like, it's different. It just hits different when you feel it and when you say it. And so I think that, giving our kids these tools is going to better prepare them, and to get them to understand that, to understand that, because the negation of the language is really just a facing of, like, I'm embarrassed of who I am, right? And so once we tear that down, and we can start to build them back up. And so, yeah, that's my little go-to.
I just have to say this too. Discipline means to teach, not to punish. And I have to say that because it gets misinterpreted all the time. I was a person who was, quote unquote, disciplined, and it was punishment. Discipline means to teach. It's important to teach our young people. We discipline them in that way, not to punish. Spanking people is not teaching. It's punishment.
Thank you. Jenny, did you have a response for the question as well?
Sure. So I grew up with my mother on the Yakima Reservation. She is Northern Arapaho, and she had the experience of attending a day boarding school on her reservation. And as a result of that, she experienced a lot of shame in being Native American. And I feel like she, like many natives who had experienced either residential or day boarding schools, there's a lot of trauma there that she had to unpack. And the result of that, to no fault of her own, obviously, was that she didn't give that investment of her culture, her language in our home. I didn't learn the Northern Arapaho language. I wasn't aware of any like cultural ties or definitely had some passed down or beliefs and values, but that tie to the Northern Arapaho tribe just wasn't as strong. Thankfully, living on the Yakima Reservation, I was surrounded by tons of Yakima family who brought me into the Longhouse, who spoke, my grandparents on my dad's side didn't really speak much English. They spoke Yakima, Shishkin in their homes, and I'd pick up, here and there without any real formal language education. And so kind of stepping back to a previous role that I held within within birth justice in the 1960s and 70s, the Indian Health Service forcibly or unknowingly sterilized about 70% of Native women who were seen in the clinics. and there's a term called the lost generation of those children that didn't get a chance to realize and be born and experience and be handed in those culture, language, traditions passed down to that generation. And so I grew up having that experience of being one of the lost generation where culture, language just wasn't handed down to us. So that's just so important to first realize that, you know, these issues that didn't happen that long ago aren't very, you know, aren't as historical as, you know, the early 1900s or 1800s and when all the treaties were being made, but they were within my mom's lifetime and my lifetime, and that's something that's still being felt within our communities. So I really appreciate one of the comments being made around, you know, being able to laugh, being able to be in places where we might have cried and we're laughing. And so, you know, storytelling, just music and film and now TV with a lot of having that representation being shown to our kids. That's just so important, and that also contributes to that change narrative that I was talking about earlier. And I so appreciate the humor, slang, things that, you know, our little groups might have this to others. It seems like an inside joke, but, you know, come and hang out with us. We'll teach you that too. So.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenny. And I think, Elaine, did you also want to make a comment? But I do want to just say that Jenny has also opened an Indigenous restaurant here in, well, not here, but in Spokane. And so what's the name of the restaurant again? Indigenous Eats, or what is?
Indigenous Eats. We're
so sorry to, it's like, you know, commercial break. But anyway, just, she's an entrepreneur as well. And so, you know, so she has know-how. Did you want to respond?
You know, I will just add, so as a result, I mean, I figured this out later, but most of my friends are my generation. We all have American names. And it was like coming out of the camp experience, really, our community really wanted to continue to prove they were American. And so my given name was Elaine Joy. And because I brought joy to, anyways, but you know, most of my other Asian friends, they had ethnic names, either first or middle name. But the thing is, when it came to language, I lived in an intergenerational family, so I learned phrases, mostly like, not like when we were getting in trouble. And it wasn't until I got into college that I started taking Japanese. But this is another part of the story. I grew up in a red line neighborhood, so it was just very common to have people speaking different languages. And my husband grew up in Southern California, so he's Japanese American, but he speaks fluent Spanish because he took Spanish. And so when our son was in high school, he said, well, I'm going to take Japanese. And we're like, no, we can't help you. And sure enough, he took Japanese, and the Japanese teacher called, said, you know, can you help Derek with his, I'm like, well, we told him he should take Spanish, but, and so, but that being said, you know, you just don't know how things are going to show up. I think the biggest gift that I found, we do a lot of things with our adult coalition. We include youth because of intergenerational. Ismael, when he talks about the Aztec dancers, have you seen that? It's just a representation of intergenerational. And it just brings such joy. I mean, that's community. And so we have to be intentional about making sure that our children have that center, you know, that they know, because that's the biggest gift you can give somebody, is their sense of self or supporting that. whether it's in community or in the workplace, but especially like in families, or extended the village people, right? So that's what I would like to say.
Luke Davies, Chelan Douglas Health District. Just first want to say thank you for sharing your stories and sharing your truth, and it is just really powerful to have you as a panel share with us your experiences. I grew up 13 miles north of here, and grew up in a very poor school district. It was 92% below the poverty line, and had very high Mexican American, Guatemalan, El Salvadorian population. And I grew up watching my friends die, get sick, not attend school, watched how they were treated differently by my teachers. And it's the big reason why I came back here to do this work in public health. And one of the biggest things that, as I came in to take this job, you know, my board was scared. They were currently getting raked over the coals during COVID about the lack of response to the Latinx community. They had activists that were showing up and really pushing them to make change and transformation. And one of the things that they said to me was like, okay, we want you to do three things. We want you to fix the pandemic. We want you to heal the relationship between the Latinx and the Caucasian community here. And we want you to rebuild the health district. Three impossible tasks.
Wow.
But one of the things that I brought from my global health experiences and coming back and coming back to my community was really saying that shift from my board saying we want these to be priorities. We want this equity part of the conversation to be here from a primarily, I'll say, 80% white board was a big signal to me that things are changing. And when I spoke with some of the activists after I came on, and I was like, I need you to keep kicking me in the teeth. I need you to keep advocating and being active and saying, this is where we need to improve. This is what things need to look like. A lot of them said, well, that's hard work, and you should just fix it. And so shifting from that, that activism piece where, you know, where elected officials and decision makers are saying, oh my gosh, we gotta be held accountable. This is negatively impacting us. And shifting into that coalition building that was mentioned. I'm just curious to hear a little bit more about what does that shift look like in terms of the coalition building? How do we do that sustainably? What does that look like? And how can we in this room support what you guys are doing in that work?
Well, thank you for that question. I appreciate you laying out the groundwork to show that you have an understanding of how things are in your community because you grew up there, you've seen the differences. You know, oftentimes, I always go back to this book. It's called A Gringo's Manual on How to Handle Mexicans. And when we're out there making noise and creating change and shaking things up, usually what happens is they'll create a board, or they'll create a focus group. They'll create something to talk about the issues, and in that board it'll be you know 20% of the 10%, 15% of the activists, 15, 20, 30% of yes men and women, and then a lot of like white folks. And so what happens is we're passionate people. We want change. We want it now. We're out here. We ain't marching for fun. We're marching to make change. And then we have to sit in these groups and go over this grueling process of like going over every single little detail and every single thing. I think a part of that is, one, that we need to know as activists what we're good at and what we are passionate about, and what we'd have other folks that could handle that part of the work, right? Because I've sat on some of these things, and oh my goodness, I'm like, so I think that's a part of it. You create these boards in this system. It's just I don't know why people love creating like boards and systems and things like that. And like if you talk to me, you say, hey, I'm trying to fix this problem, blah, blah, blah. You come to me, I'm like, hey man, where's your checkbook at, bro? Let's get real, because the power is in deciding. I got money here. You guys decide what to do with that. You know, let us do that. Let's bring it to the people and let the people decide what they want to do with the budget. Let the people decide how they want to handle the situation, rather than us still in the position where we're like, oh, well, we would like this. Do you think it's okay? Nah, fam, we're not asking no more. We want our check now. So that's just my little 2 cents.
Thank you. Thank you.
PayPal, Cash App, Venmo.
I think there is, definitely that's something that is, there's a movement that's
Just
going
before
that direction.
budgeting.
Yeah, no, truly, there is. And so, and it's important, right?
Yeah.
So anyway, I think we have no, are we done? Where's Jeff? Oh, okay. One more question? Yes.
I got a mic here.
Oh.
Right here.
You got it?
Where's she at? Put your hand up. Here you go.
Thank you. My name is Leah, and my Swahili name is Cry Out, which I'm here to do today as a representative of Black and African American women of color. So I'm from Kent, Washington, so very close to Tacoma, and now I live in Idaho, so definitely a contrast, as I live in a predominantly white community. I have, however, not, interestingly enough, experienced racism within Idaho, but grew up and was facing it quite a bit. And I'm big on the fact that supremacy, going against it, it comes in all avenues of different cultures. It comes in white supremacy, Black supremacy, Native American supremacy, and on. And so I appreciate all of your comments today, your walk of lives, and what you guys have personally experienced. It would have, however, been really interesting to see the perspective of a white person and what they face for their culture. And so I just wanted to close it by saying thank you to Mr. Lopez's comment on the anchor of love, because that is what I stand for. So thank you all for your time.
Thank you for saying that. I was sitting here and I have the yes men. I don't like that statement. We all advocate differently. There's some of us that are systemic changers that it takes a little bit more diplomacy. And I think when I met John Lewis, this is what he told me. He told me about good trouble and necessary trouble. And he said some people that's their gifting, to agitate the system, to stand and to resist. And for some of us, we're in the systems that that becomes the time when we actually get heard because if we work together. But there's often a tear down of individuals who don't advocate, with the signage and with all the language, that you're not doing a good job of it. I don't like it. I reject that statement, and I speak today and say that people advocate differently. There's diversity within diversity, and so that includes cognitive diversity, and we must honor that as well. We look at it in its broadest sense. So yes, thank you for sharing that. And yes, the root is love. Community is the place where everyone belongs, and that's what we need to build: inclusive community.
So thank you. And so just a wrap-up comment here. Thank you so much to the panel. And I just have to say that, this is a beginning of a conversation. It's not the end. Everyone is invited. And I think that's the really important key is that, but we have to stay in the same room. We have to be together to do the work. And so however we express ourselves, it's okay, we're individuals. We get the freedom to do that. And, but doing it together and sorting through the heavy work that we have to do, we really do have to kind of, sit with each other, even through the times when it's uncomfortable. So thank you all very much. I love you guys. Thank you so much for being here.